It's my great privilege to introduce H.P. Schroer. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
H.P., you were represented by Scott in another case, another class action, which was against Verizon, wasn't it?
Yes, it was.
Tell us a little bit about what happened with you and why you became involved with this case.
Well, like your viewing audience, I felt that the only people in class action cases were those of the attorneys that made money, and the class itself was not truly representative.
In other words, the everyday average person didn't get anything.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And I was motivated to get involved in the class action because Verizon, I thought that the early termination fee was illegal.
Well, let me ask you a question, and I'll ask this to you also. It is in their contract, isn't it? Is it in their contract?
It is in the contract, Steve, but
just because something's in a contract doesn't make it legal, right?
Right. You can't have a contract, for example, to sell your baby.
Okay.
You could have it. That might be in the contract, but that would not be a legal contract. You can't have a contract to sell yourself into slavery.
Yeah.
So there are certain things that the law does not allow.
And that's one of them.
And one of the things the law does not allow is a contractual penalty. You can have an agreement that says if someone breaches, this is the amount of damages that they will have to pay, and that's called liquidated damages. But it has to be based on a good faith estimate of the actual loss that the breach would cause. And what we proved in the early termination fee trials against Sprint and against Verizon was that the early termination fee had no relationship to any actual loss caused to the carrier, and it was arbitrarily set at an amount that was high enough, just high enough to discourage people from leaving the company. It was not a mechanism to compensate for a real loss. That's why they were illegal.
HP, when you got this early termination fee, you just thought that was wrong, right?
Yes, and I refused to pay it. And what happened is that I was put out reported to the credit reporting agencies, which has some consequences attached to it because my credit was impaired.
You were blacklisted?
Yes.
By other phone companies?
No, because I didn't apply to other phone companies at that particular time.
And this was all over how much money?
The early termination fee was $150.
So for $150, they reported you to the credit agencies as not being a responsible person.
Right. I was essentially a deadbeat. And so I complained to the FTC, the FCC, the Attorney General. I wrote to my representatives, and it was by virtue of a letter to the FCC wherein I registered a complaint that I heard from Verizon. And they told me that they were canceling the early termination fee, and they were going to notify the credit reporting agencies that the charge had been canceled.
Yeah.
And I said, fantastic. I said, are you changing your policy now? Is everybody going to be notified? And they said, no. We're making an exception for you.
And did they do it?
Oh, yes, they canceled it. They made an exception for me, but they did nothing for everybody else.
So you were taken care of, but you went beyond that, didn't you?
Yes, I was so ticked off that I was going to become my own attorney, which is something that someone should never do. So I did some internet research, and through that I got in touch with Scott.
Right.
And what Scott did by virtue of the early termination class action suit is made my voice and Miss Brown, gave us the voice of 4 million. I think the number, you would know better.
Ultimately, we did a nationwide settlement that was several million people, yes.
Several million people. So we, in turn, were speaking for your listeners out there, 4 million of them.
So
without Scott, that voice would have been a voice in the wilderness.
Well, I really admire, you were taken care of, but that wasn't good enough, was it?
No.
You wanted to have other people taken care of. And that, you see, that's what this show is all about. We have the lawyer, Scott, who stands up and represents people who are unable to stand up for themselves. They don't know the right paperwork to file or whatever. And we put these big companies to test. Well, you had the persistence, you found the right talent, and I want to thank you very much for appearing on this show.